This story may be based on true events, so listen to it until the end. The storm rolled in at midnight, a thick curtain of rain swallowing the town whole. It wasn't the kind of rain that drummed pleasantly against rooftops. It was a hissing, whispering downpour, as if the droplets carried voices too faint to understand. Lena had been driving when it started, her headlights cutting through the downpour like two weak candles in a vast, wet darkness. The road ahead blurred, the windshield wipers fighting a losing battle. Then, her car sputtered and died, leaving her stranded on the empty stretch of highway. No signal on her phone, no other cars in sight. She stepped outside, the rain immediately soaking through her clothes, cold and heavy. That's when she heard it, the whispering. Not from the wind, not from the trees, but from the rain itself. A murmur, just beneath the surface of the sound, syllables forming and dissolving like ink in water. Lena, her breath hitched. That was her name. Impossible. She turned, scanning the darkness, but there was nothing. Just the endless rain and the faint glow of her dying headlights. Then movement. A figure, standing far down the road, barely visible through the downpour. Tall, too tall, its limbs stretching unnaturally as it swayed in place. The whispering grew louder, more insistent, voices overlapping in a language that made her skull ache. Come closer. Lena stumbled back toward her car, but the door wouldn't open. The handle was slick, not with rain, but with something thick and dark. Blood? She turned back. The figure was closer now, its movements jerky, like a marionette pulled by unseen strings. The rain around it didn't fall straight down. It swirled, as if repelled by its presence. Then, the whispers became a chorus, rising into a scream that wasn't quite human. The figure lunged, and the storm swallowed everything. Lena woke with a gasp, her body jerking upright. Cold tile pressed against her cheek. She wasn't on the road anymore. The room was dim, lit only by a flickering fluorescent bulb overhead. The air smelled stale, wet concrete, rust, and something else, something sour and rotting. She pushed herself up, her hands trembling, and realized she was in some kind of basement. Water dripped from the ceiling in slow, uneven pulses, each drop echoing too loud in the silence. And then she heard it again, the whispering. It wasn't coming from outside. It was inside the room with her, seeping from the walls, the puddles on the floor, even her own breath when she exhaled. The words slithered against her ears, just beyond comprehension. You shouldn't have run. Lena spun around. The basement stretched farther than it should have, the shadows at the edges too deep, too wrong. Something moved in the darkness, a ripple, like water disturbed by an unseen hand. Then fingers, long skeletal fingers, pressing up from a puddle as if the liquid surface had turned solid. She backed away, her pulse hammering in her throat. The fingers flexed, then curled, gripping the edge of the puddle like a ledge. A hand emerged, then an arm, the skin slick and gray, streaked with black veins. The whispers rose to a chant. Stay, stay, stay. Lena turned and ran, her bare feet slapping against the wet floor. The door at the far end of the basement was rusted shut, but she threw her weight against it, shoulder screaming in protest. It groaned open just as the thing behind her pulled itself free of the water with a wet, tearing sound. She stumbled into a hallway, endless, lined with doors, all identical. The walls wept moisture, the ceiling sagging with the weight of unseen rain. The whispers followed her, bouncing off the peeling wallpaper, slipping under the cracks of the doors. One of the doors creaked open. Inside, a figure stood with its back to her, drenched in rainwater, its clothes clinging to a body that was too thin, too elongated. Tilted its head, as if listening. Then, without turning, it spoke in a voice that was not a voice, just the sound of rain hitting pavement, shaped into words. "You can't leave. The storm is hungry." Lena turned to run again, but the hallway behind her was gone. Only a wall of falling rain remained, the droplets suspended in midair, each one reflecting a distorted version of her own terrified face. And then the reflections smiled. Lena screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the rain. The droplets hung in the air like 1,000 glistening eyes, watching her. The reflections of her face twisted further, mouth stretching too wide, pupils dilating into black voids, before detaching from the rain and rushing toward her in a liquid swarm. She threw up her arms, bracing for impact, but the moment the first droplet touched her skin, the world shifted. Suddenly, she was standing in the middle of a flooded street, the town she recognized but distorted. Buildings sagged inward as if weighed down by the endless downpour. Streetlights flickered with a sickly green glow, and the air smelled like wet decay. The rain here didn't just fall. It crawled, slithering down walls and pooling in the gutters with a purpose. And she wasn't alone. Shapes moved in the mist, figures hunched and shuffling, their outlines blurring at the edges like wet ink. They didn't walk so much as slosh, their limbs too fluid, their heads lolling as if their bones had dissolved. One turned toward her, and she saw its face was nothing but a smooth, featureless mask of rainwater, stretching and reforming with each step. "You're part of the storm now," the whispers chorused, coming from everywhere and nowhere. Lena's breath came in ragged gasps. She needed to move to hide. But where? The water was rising, already lapping at her ankles, and with every step, she felt something brushing against her legs beneath the surface. Fingers, maybe, or something worse. A hand clamped onto her wrist. She whirled, ready to fight, but it was a man, or what was left of one. His skin was pallid, bloated from prolonged exposure, his eyes wide with terror. "You can hear them too?" he rasped, voice barely audible over the rain. "The whispers." Lena nodded, too stunned to speak. "Then you're running out of time," he said, his grip tightening. "The storm takes you in pieces. First your voice, then your face, then your—" A ripple passed through the water behind him. His words cut off as a tendril of liquid darkness lashed out from the flood, wrapping around his throat. His eyes bulged as he was yanked backward, disappearing beneath the surface with a muffled scream. The water churned for a moment before going still. Then, slowly, a new face emerged from the rain-streaked pavement. His face, forming in the droplets, mouth open in a silent scream. Lena stumbled back, but the whispers were inside her head now, digging deeper. No more running. The floodwater surged, rising to her knees, her waist, pulling her down with icy hands. She fought, thrashing, but the storm was everywhere. In her lungs, in her veins, in the spaces between her thoughts. And then, just as the water closed over her head, she heard it one last time. "Welcome home." The water filled her lungs, but she didn't drown. Instead, Lena opened her eyes beneath the surface, staring up through the rippling dark at a sky that wasn't there. The flood wasn't water anymore. It was something thicker, heavier, alive with shifting currents and half-formed faces that pressed against her skin before dissolving back into the gloom. And she could breathe. The realization should have terrified her, but the whispers had hollowed out her fear, replacing it with a terrible, quiet understanding. This was how it happened. This was how the storm took you. Not by drowning, but by changing you. A shadow moved in the depths below her. Something vast. Something coiled in the dark like a serpent made of rain and rot. It unspooled upward, and for the first time the whispers stopped. Silence. Then, Lena. The voice wasn't human. It wasn't even a voice. It was the sound of a river flooding its banks, of a storm cracking open the sky, of something old and hungry waking up after centuries of sleep. She tried to scream, but the water rushed into her mouth, her throat, her bones, and suddenly, she was standing on the road again. Her car was there, engine dead, headlights cutting through the rain. The storm still hissed against the asphalt, but the whispers were gone. For a heartbeat, she thought it had all been a hallucination, some waking nightmare brought on by exhaustion. Then she looked down. Her reflection in a puddle stared back. But it wasn't her. The face in the water smiled with too many teeth, its eyes black pits that dripped like ink. When she touched her own cheek, her fingers came away wet. Not with rain, with something darker. And in the distance, the storm rumbled, low and eager. It wasn't over. The rain had tasted her. Now it wanted more. The rain clung to her skin like oil as Lena ran. Not toward town, no, she wouldn't drag this curse back to living people, but to the only place that made terrible sense anymore. The old Blackwell orphanage, its skeletal frame barely visible through the downpour, stood at the end of a mud-choked road. The place had been abandoned for decades, but the storm loved it. She could feel the wrongness humming in her teeth as she approached. The front doors were swollen shut with damp, but the moment her fingers brushed the wood, they creaked open on their own. The air inside smelled like wet newspaper and spoiled milk. Water dripped from the ceiling in perfect sync with the rhythm of the storm outside. Drip, 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 and between each drop, a whisper. "You're late." The voice came from upstairs. Not the chorus of the storm, but a single, familiar tone. Her own. The second-floor hallway stretched longer than the building should allow, doors hanging ajar like slack jaws. At the end, in the last room, something waited. Lena's steps left wet footprints that squirmed before dissolving into the warped floorboards. Inside the room, a girl sat on a rusted bed frame, her back to the door. Lena's breath hitched. The girl was wearing her clothes. The same jeans, the same soaked sweater. "I wondered when you'd get here," the girl said, tilting her head too far, like a broken doll. When she turned, Lena saw her own face grinning back at her, but wrong. The skin was translucent, water sloshing beneath the surface. The eyes were glassy and still like a doll's. "You're not me," Lena choked out. The thing laughed, and the sound was the creak of a ship sinking. "Not yet." Stood, limbs moving with liquid smoothness. "But the storm's been whispering your name for so long. It's hungry, Lena, and you're already half drowned." Lena stumbled back, but the hallway was gone. The walls pulsed inward, breathing like a living throat. The floor softened beneath her, turning to sludge. The thing that wore her face stepped closer, its fingers elongating, dripping. "Don't you want to know what's at the bottom of the storm?" Outside, the rain roared like a living thing, and Lena finally understood. She wasn't escaping. She was being hollowed out, and soon, something else would step into her skin and walk back into the world. Lena's reflection lunged, but she was faster. Her hand shot out, plunging into the thing's chest. She expected resistance, but her fingers sank into cold, stagnant water. The doppelganger shrieked, a sound like radio static and breaking glass, its form rippling violently. "You don't get me?" Lena snarled, her voice raw. "Not like this." She pulled. The thing unraveled like a soaked tapestry, its stolen features melting into the rising water at their feet. But as its screams faded, the orphanage groaned around her, walls bending, with splintering, as if the entire building were a ship capsizing into some unseen abyss. The floor gave way, Lena fell, not down, but through, the storm swallowing her whole. She landed in a place without light, without sound, without up or down. Only the rain, falling endlessly in the void. And in the distance something moved. It was vast, older than the town, older than the rain itself. It had no shape she could comprehend, only impressions. The curve of a spine like a rotting dam, ribs like broken levees, a mouth that could swallow rivers. The whispers weren't voices here, they were prayers. The storm wasn't just alive, it was a god, and it had been waiting for her. Lena, her name wasn't a sound. It was the weight of drowned cities pressing against her skull. She should have been afraid. But the thing inside her, the hollow place where the whispers had been, ached. The god of the rain stretched closer, and Lena, with nothing left to lose, reached out to meet it. The moment Lena's fingers brushed the entity, the world inverted. She saw everything. The first rains that fell on barren earth. The forgotten things that had worshipped them. The way the storm had slept for centuries beneath riverbeds and reservoirs, dreaming of drowned voices. It had been called by many names, the drowning maw, the thirst below, the god of broken levees. But now it wore only hunger, and it wanted out. You are hollow now, the storm pulsed through her veins. But I can fill you. The offer wasn't mercy, it was symbiosis. The thing needed a voice to walk in the dry world, and Lena needed to survive. She felt its power surge through her, the weight of 100 floods, the memory of every swallowed town. Her veins darkened beneath her skin like cracks in dry earth. When she blinked, rainwater pooled in her cupped palms. The orphanage reassembled itself around her, but differently now. The walls breathed, the floorboards bled dark water, and outside, the storm obeyed. She stepped onto the porch as the rain parted before her like a curtain. The drowned things in the floodwaters bowed their malformed heads. The whispers had become a single voice, hers. In town, lights flickered behind rain-streaked windows. People slept unaware as the gutters filled with something darker than water. Lena raised her hand. Across the street, a puddle twisted upward, forming a perfect replica of the mailman who'd waved at her yesterday. It smiled with his teeth, waiting for her command. The storm god murmured inside her skull. "Shall we begin?" Lena closed her new, bottomless eyes and smiled back. The rain didn't stop for 37 days. At first, people called it a fluke. Just one of those long, wet springs the old-timers muttered about over coffee at the diner. Then the creek swelled. The power lines sagged. The roads became rivers, and still, the rain kept falling in that same unnatural rhythm, like a heartbeat. And always whispering. Sheriff Hollis noticed it first. He'd been walking his usual patrol past the Blackwell orphanage, though these days, he swore the building looked different, the windows reflecting the streetlights a little too brightly, like the glass was wet on both sides when he saw her. Lena Voss, standing barefoot in the middle of the storm, her hair plastered to her skull, her arms outstretched as if welcoming the downpour. The water around her ankles wasn't flowing downhill like it should. Coiled. It watched. "Lena," Hollis called, his hand drifting toward his sidearm. "You okay, kid?" She turned her head, just slightly, just enough for him to see the way the raindrops hovered an inch from her skin before sliding down like worshippers touching a shrine. "It's rude," she said, her voice layered with something that wasn't human, to interrupt a baptism. Behind her, the orphanage's doors creaked open. Shadows moved inside. Shapes that might have been children, if children were made of floodwater and bad memories. Hollis took a step back. The puddle at his feet gripped his boot. And as the first icy fingers of the storm climbed his legs, Lena smiled. Somewhere, a levee broke. The storm had teeth now. Lena felt them every time she exhaled. 1,000 needle points of pressure where the rain hung suspended in her lungs before exhaling as something darker. The town had become an altar, its people unwitting congregants in a liturgy of drowning. But tonight was different. The rain tasted metallic. She stood atop the old water tower, watching lightning fork across a sky that hadn't seen the moon in weeks. Below, Main Street had become a canal, the traffic lights bleeding red through the currents. Something was wrong. The storm god inside her thrashed like a hooked fish. Then she saw them, figures emerging from the floodwaters. Not her waterlogged devotees. These were dry, impossibly so, their skin cracked like drought-stricken earth. The first one looked up at her with eyes like desert canyons. "Little sister," it rasped, "did you think you were the first vessel?" The realization hit like a lightning strike. This wasn't just a storm, it was a war, and the other side had found her. Lena raised her hands as the first dust devil touched the floodwaters, and the world exploded in steam and screaming. The steam cleared to reveal a battlefield of contradictions. Asphalt bubbling like tar pits where dust and water met, storefront windows melting like ice in one spot while cracking from desiccation 3 feet away. The drought walkers moved through this chaos with terrible purpose, their parched fingers leaving trails of cracks in the air itself. Lena felt the storm god's panic vibrating through her marrow. This was why it had hidden for centuries. Not out of patience, out of fear. The lead drought walker tilted its head, sand sifting from its collarbones. "You house a coward," it croaked. The drowning maw fled the last reckoning. It knows what comes for eaters who grow too loud. Raindrops crystallized midair around them, becoming jagged obsidian shards. Lena realized with dawning horror that the storm god wasn't fighting. It was digging. Tendrils of floodwater burrowed into the earth beneath her, not spreading outward but down, tunneling desperately towards some deep place. The orphanage groaned as its foundations shifted, the entire structure listing like a ship preparing to dive. The drought walkers lunged, just as the ground opened beneath Lena in a geyser of black water. She fell into the storm's secret heart, its final sanctuary, a drowned cathedral. Pews of waterlogged oak stretched toward an altar where something vast and piscine twitched in chains of rusted iron. The true drowning maw, not the godhead she carried, but its ravaged primordial body, webbed in the roots of ancient trees that drank the darkness. "They come for the feast," the waters boomed. "You must be the famine." The understanding unfolded like a knife. She wasn't just a vessel. She was the lock, and the drought walkers weren't here to kill her. They'd come to make her open. The cathedral walls pulsed like a living throat around her. Lena reached out, her fingers brushing the iron chains binding the monstrous shape in the shadows. The moment she made contact, memory flooded in. She saw the beginning, not of the storm, but of the balance. A desert so vast it swallowed civilizations, given life by a being of endless thirst. A flood so deep it drowned mountains, ruled by the twitching leviathan before her. 2 ancient hungers, locked in eternal war until the first humans came, not with spears, but with cunning. They didn't slay the gods, they used them. The chains weren't prison bars, they were conduits. The roots weren't restraints, they were siphons. The towns built atop these burial grounds weren't accidents, they were harvests. And Lena? She was the latest in a long line of sacrifices meant to keep both sides starved just enough to obey. The drowning maw shuddered in its chains, its voice gurgling through the dark water. "They made us into engines. Now they forget how to feed us." The dry one wakes, the old packed phrase. Above, the ceiling trembled. dust sifted down like the first warnings of a coming quake. The drought walkers were close. Lena stared at her hands, the hands that could unmake the lock with a single thought. The storm god inside her whimpered, not in fear, but in hunger. A terrible choice took shape. Keep the chains. Let the town, and maybe the world, burn when the drought walkers broke through. Or unleash the flood, and become the monster that remembered how to drown civilizations. Lena's fingers curled around the iron chains. The metal screamed like a living thing as rust bloomed outward in cancerous patches. Somewhere above, the orphanage's timbers splintered as drought walkers breached the storm's last defenses. The drowning maw arched its eel-like body, black water gushing from between its teeth. Yes, it hissed not to Lena, but to the thing inside her, the fragment of itself it had sent hunting for a worthy vessel. A thunderclap of dry heat punched through the cathedral's ceiling. Sand poured through the rupture, hissing as it hit the flooded floor. The lead drought walker descended like a spider made of cracked earth, its mouth a yawning pit. "Foolish little Locke," it rasped. "You don't understand what you guard." Lena bared her teeth. Water streamed from her eyes, her nostrils, the spaces between her fingers. "I understand enough." She pulled. The chains shattered. For one heartbeat, silence. Then the drowning maw unfolded. Its true form erupted upward in a column of black water and screaming fish bones, swallowing the drought walker whole. The cathedral walls dissolved into the surge as the maw's laughter shook the earth. A sound like dams breaking, like cities flooding. Lena felt the change start in her bones. Her spine elongated. Her ribs fused into a cage of porous bone designed to hold entire rivers. The last human thought flickered through her dissolving mind. They wanted a lock. I'll show them a flood. The town died first, then the valley, then... Lena's consciousness dissolved into the flood, her thoughts scattering like droplets in a downpour. She was no longer a girl, no longer a vessel. She was the storm itself, the hunger given form, the ancient wrath of the drowning maw unleashed. The town vanished beneath the rising tide, buildings collapsing like sandcastles, streets swallowed whole. Screams bubbled up through the murk before being silenced. The drought walkers fought, their parched fingers clawing at the deluge, but water always finds the cracks, always seeps through. The flood spilled beyond the valley, following riverbeds and dry creeks, filling reservoirs to bursting. It whispered as it traveled, its voice a chorus of drowned things. Somewhere, a child pressed their face to a rain-streaked window, watching the water rise in the yard. Somewhere, a farmer stood in his field as the crops blackened and rotted under the endless downpour. The world was so dry, so terribly dry, and the maw had been starving for so long. Lena, what was left of her, felt the moment the first city fell, felt the weight of all those lives swallowed, the way the water grew heavier, richer, more alive with every soul it claimed. The maw sang in triumph, its voice vibrating through the depths. And then, a shift, a tremor in the floodwaters, a hesitation in the storm's hunger, because water remembers, and somewhere, deep in the drowned dark, a flicker of her remained. A girl's voice, small but unbroken. "No!" The mole recoiled. The flood hesitated. And for the first time in centuries, the rain changed. The hesitation lasted only a heartbeat, but it was enough. The floodwaters stuttered. Currents that had moved with single-minded hunger now coiled back on themselves. Confused, the drowning maw thrashed in the depths, its rage sending shockwaves through the drowned world. "You are mine!" it roared, the words vibrating through Lena's bones. But Lena, what remained of her, clung to that single syllable like a lifeline. No, she remembered. the weight of her father's hand on her shoulder as he taught her to swim in the old quarry, the sound of her mother singing in the kitchen while rain tapped against the windows, the way sunlight used to catch the droplets after a summer storm, turning the world into something glittering and new. The mole recoiled as if scalded. "These are nothing," it hissed. "Mortal moments, fleeting. The water will swallow them all." But water doesn't just destroy, carries. It remembers. Lena reached into the flood, not to drown, but to gather. Every lost moment, every swallowed laugh, every tear ever shed into its depths. The moss screamed as the memories surged upward, bright and sharp as broken glass. The floodwaters trembled. Then they changed. The change began in the silence between heartbeats. Lena felt it first in the way the water moved against her skin, not with the hungry pull of the maw, but with the gentle persistence of a summer rain. The floodwaters still rose, still swallowed, but something new moved beneath their surface. The memories she had gathered swirled like phosphorescence in dark water, each one a pinprick of light against the endless dark. The maw sensed it too. She felt its confusion ripple through the drowned world, the way its currents hesitated as they touched these strange new fragments. "What is this?" it demanded, its voice the sound of a glacier calving into the sea. "These are not yours to keep," but they were. They all were. Every life the water had ever taken had left something behind. Not just bones, not just silence, but moments. A child's laughter echoing across a pond. Lovers' hands brushing as they walked by the river. An old man's last breath as he watched the sunset over the lake. The water had swallowed them all, but it had never truly forgotten. Lena opened her arms, and the flood opened with her. The memories surged upward in a great spiral, each one unfolding like a water lily at dawn. The maw roared as the light touched it, its ancient form writhing in the sudden brightness. Where the memories brushed its scaled hide, the darkness sloughed away like rotting kelp, revealing something older and stranger beneath. Not just hunger, but the first rain that ever fell on barren stone, the first river that ever carved its path to the sea. For the first time in millennia, the drowning mole remembered what it was before the world named it a monster. The floodwaters stilled. Above, the storm clouds parted just a sliver, just enough for a single shaft of sunlight to pierce through and glimmer on the restless waves. It caught the edges of the maw's vast form as it rose one last time, its body now more light than shadow, more memory than flesh. "You." Its voice was the gentlest of rains now, the kind that nourishes rather than drowns. "You reminded the water what else it could carry." Then it was gone, not dead, not defeated, but changed. The waters that had been rising began instead to move in great, slow circles, finding their natural paths again. Buildings emerged from the flood like islands, streaming with water but no longer drowning. The rain still fell, but softly now, washing the salt from windows and the mud from streets. And Lena? She stood on what had once been the roof of the old orphanage, her feet bare against the wet shingles, her hair plastered to her skull by the gentle rain. The power still thrummed in her veins. She could feel every raindrop for miles, every current, every hidden aquifer, but the hunger was gone. In its place was something quieter, something more patient. In the distance, she saw the first survivors emerging, their faces turned upward in wonder at the pale sunlight. They would rebuild, of course. Humans always did. And when the next great drought came, when the earth cracked and the rivers ran dry, they would pray for rain again. And the water would remember. The end. Thank you for listening until the end. Feel free to leave a like and subscribe. Write a comment if you liked the story or what you would have done.